Hey, welcome back to Diecast Cars. So today we got a comparison for you guys, and what I would like to do is talk about how Diecast Cars today fare with what we saw 20 years ago. So post Fast and the Furious, and I'll give you guys a little bit of a spoiler alert. It's going to be very JDM heavy, but when it comes to the trends 2 decades ago, it's very interesting. There's a lot of things that repeated themselves just in the last couple of years here, but I'm here to compare them from a price standpoint, from an overall quality, aesthetic standpoint, just to give you guys an idea of diecast cars back then, and the idea that we really just didn't take advantage of them the way that we should have, not like how the market is today. Starting with muscle machines. In the import tuner series specifically, I recently just found a lot of 24 of these off of eBay, and I picked it up for $170. So 170 divided by 24, I basically paid $7 a piece for each one of these cars, and that's taxes, fees, and shipping all included, which I thought was just an amazing deal. These right now, they're selling for about $10 to $15 depending on the make and model, but man, this is just pure nostalgia for me because I had this exact '01 Subaru WRX back when I was in junior high, and I thought it was the coolest thing. This was just the trend from back then. And on top of that, import tuner, I mean, who doesn't remember import tuner, the magazines, the cars, lots of other things within that magazine that just drew a lot of attention within the car scene, guys. And it just basically made the car culture what it is when it comes to JDM and tuner cars today. And of what remains left of my collection, I still do have this SS tuners, so basically the second generation of muscle machines import tuners. This was the Acura NSX out of that line, and the design principles of these cars are basically all the same. I mean, you got an opening hood, you got very detailed engine parts, the big spoiler, the big exhaust, all the details here on the bottom. I mean, basically to the nines, guys. I mean, this, in all honesty, guys, I would say is RLC quality. From an overall detail standpoint, I mean, this is very on par with what Hot Wheels and RLC is doing, and that is the direct comparison with these muscle machines import tuners. I mean, this is a very tough comparison, but you got the RLC pink party car Nissan Skyline on the right, and then obviously the SS tuners muscle machines NSX on the left here. I mean, you can see they both have opening hood features, they both have engine bay detail, but the thing about the Hot Wheels is that you can tell it's just casted right into the metal. There's no depth into this engine bay, whereas if you look at the engine bay for the NSX, I mean, there's clearly intricate parts that make up the engine in there. All white interior on the pink party car. I mean, we have seen other RLC pieces that have a lot more intricately detailed interiors, but again, you get that automatically with the muscle machine import tuners. And if anything, guys, I mean, you could say that muscle machines is just one step ahead because it does actually have disc brakes. I don't know if you guys can see them on there, but it's an actual disc back there behind the wheel versus, I don't know if you guys recall, but this specific cast for the Nissan Skyline, the blue version from RLC had a painted disc brake in the back, and they've since gone away with that feature on these cars. I mean, every single R34 RLC release just does not have that metallic painted disc in the back anymore. I don't know if it's just a cost standpoint or if the equipment that does that is just no longer in use, but it's kind of a shame. And to be honest, this is at retail price $25, whereas this muscle machines is back then, in all honesty, was only $3. So account for inflation, I mean, you could say this is probably like a $5-6 car today, but again, that is far less than the retail price that we were paying for this pink party car off of RLC. So if anything, guys, I would say +1 for muscle machines. And one other quick comparison for muscle machines while we're at it, I just got this in the mail today as well. 2002 hobby show exclusive. It is a chrome red Honda Civic EK9 with what looks like a Fields wide body, which if any of you guys are familiar with the tuner scene back in the early 2000s, I mean, that was the go-to wide body kit for the EK9, which was such a popular platform. And being a hobby exclusive car, you can see this car is actually limited to 2016 pieces, which is a pretty low overall quantity in the grand scheme of things when you're talking about RLC pieces that are 10s, 20,000s, right? And this piece, amazingly enough, I picked it up off eBay for $11 plus shipping, so all said and done maybe about $18 total. And I just thought that was such a bargain for something that has such a low quantity. And in all honesty, in person, guys, it looks really good. I mean, that chrome paint, I mean, it would give Spectraflame a run for its money. And the funny thing is, guys, if you think about it, this came out in the early 2000s, and you compare it to the 2022 Honda Civic EK9 Civic Type R, the Golden Nugget. And this thing, guys, and again, I know this is a mainline, it's a $1 retail price point, but we all know that the secondary market value on this is fetching anywhere from $150 to $175. And honestly, I mean, from just a pure aesthetic standpoint, I would think that the hobby show Muscle Machines exclusive is nicer looking. I mean, if we're calling this the Golden Nugget, I would call this EK9 the Ruby. But it's just so interesting that 20 years apart, we have another EK9 that is just as flashy, has all the details, and yet one is super low in value, and the EK9 Golden Nugget from Hot Wheels is vastly superior in the idea that it is just more sought after, it's worth more on the secondary market. But there's gems like this out there that exist that are just as rare and nice, and no one cares about them. Next up, you got the Hot Wheels Hot Tuners lineup, or I believe at one time it was even called the Car Tuners, right? Because of the cartoony shape of each one of these cars. I mean, they're real cars, but you can see they're just really blown up and exaggerated as far as the body lines and all the details. But man, I remember, again, grade school days, getting into tuner cars. I ate these things up because I just thought they looked so cool, and they were actually based off of real cars. Like, for instance, this Honda Civic SI EP3, this was an actual car that was debuted at Hot Import Nights and the SEMA shows. I mean, if you want to look into it, just Google search Alpine Honda Civic SI EP3. I mean, there's a million articles about this car from Motor Trend, from Super Street. I mean, this thing was very, very intricate. I mean, the interior, it almost didn't look like you could sit in there, but it was just super futuristic. And I mean, the graphics, the paint job was just so extreme. I mean, well done, Alpine, the sponsor of this Honda Civic. And Hot Wheels actually put this into a diecast form in this cartoon series, which is so perfect for this particular car. And again, I picked up all three of these cartooners off of eBay for $10 a piece, again, because they're just forgotten. Even 20 years later, they're just the forgotten lineup of cars that used to exist, but they have so much significance and they encapsulate so much of what the car scene was back in the early 2000s. I do have one of these cartooners in hand as well too, this one being the Honda Civic SI with the modern image graphic, a nice play on the 164 Hot Wheels version that was released too. That's why I have this one. But compared to modern day, you guys probably thinking the same thing. It really reminds me of what Muscle Machines is doing. And it's so weird for Muscle Machines to go from the import tuners that I was just showcasing a second ago to this. It's just so strange because they took their diecast cars in a completely different direction. I mean, again, very exaggerated cars, albeit real cars, but big wheels, no interiors, tinted windows, giant rear ends of the car, and then skinny little fronts of the cars. I mean, literally exactly what Hot Wheels did with hot tuners and car tuners back in the early 2000s. Price points for these car tuners, I recall from back in the day, I mean, no more than $3, and obviously adjusted for inflation, the muscle machines today are $5 to $6, which is right in line from a inflation adjustment. But from a chase piece standpoint, for example, this 240Z right here, the latest sold is around $30. And just compare that to the $10 that I paid for these three in the back here. I mean, again, it's just so odd that something like this carries more weight, more value, and being more sought after than something 20 years ago that essentially executed the same exact thing. And honestly, because these are based on real cars, or at least real details from cars that used to exist in the early 2000s, I would give this comparison to the Hot Wheels Hot Tuners. And you know I mean business when I break out the Junimai Custom Datsun 510 wagon. I feel like the early 2020s is when die-cast customizations really became a thing, a trend that everybody was doing. I was even doing it. Swapping wheels to painting the bodies, detailing the interiors. Now we're seeing people 3D print wide body kits and NOS bottles and different wheels. I mean, the wheel selection nowadays is unbelievable. I mean, another Datsun 510 wagon here. I mean, this one, again, you guys have seen me talk about it, but another custom that was just done to the nines. Awesome paint job, clear coated, all the details, real riders, and then it was fastened back together. It rolls well, it looks good. I mean, the early 2020s is definitely the age for the die-cast modifiers. And speaking of modifiers, that's exactly what we were gifted back in the early 2000s with the actual brand called Modifiers. I mean, starting with this Mitsubishi Eclipse GSX, yes, a brand that even called out the iconic trim level that we all wanted with the Eclipse, the all-wheel drive turbo version. And what you see here, you get custom seats, tinted glass, interchangeable tires, you got tools to get it done. I mean, there's little springs right here to adjust the suspension. I mean, what other die-cast car does that today? I mean, to do that on a Hot Wheels nowadays, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, I'm sure it can be done. I'm sure somebody's done it. But to put active suspension on a Hot Wheels, I mean, that's a lot of modification. And we were just gifted that in the early 2000s with this Eclipse, with this Integra Type R. I mean, you got the carbon fiber hood. It's already got a body kit on it, right? It's got nice white aftermarket wheels. Again, tires, tint. You got racing bucket seats. And you got all the licensed aftermarket brands that you would have purchased from the early 2000s. So Racing Heart, Nitto tires, Apexy, Ground Designs. I mean, that's just unbelievable what we had in the early 2000s, and it really feels like we just took it for granted. And don't get me wrong, it's not a knock on customizers today. I mean, from a price point standpoint, modified cars range from all different prices. I mean, you got simple wheel swaps that folks are selling for $5 to $10, which is kind of surprising. You got full custom builds, paint jobs, decals in the works. People are, in all honesty, getting $30+ I mean, again, this Junimai Custom Datsun 510 with no active suspension, guys. It retailed at $400 off the Greddy website. Now, granted, that was because Junimai is Junimai, but I mean, just purely from, again, an aesthetic standpoint, what you get for what you pay, it's no different than the Modifiers line, where you get all these customizable pieces and you get a car that is suited to your liking. So just something to think about, guys. I mean, stuff like this used to exist, and we're doing what we can with dollar models today. It's just so interesting. So by my count, guys, that's 3 for all the early 2000 diecast trends versus 0 for all of the current diecast trends, guys. Or maybe I'm just being biased because this was straight out of my childhood, but nonetheless, guys, it just makes you think, what did we not appreciate back then, 20 years ago? And also looking futuristically, what trends are happening right now with diecast cars that we're not taking advantage of, and we're gonna look back 20 years later and do one of these comparison videos and say we were idiots for not buying everything, guys. But that's what I got for you guys today. Let me know what is nostalgic for you guys when it comes to diecast cars. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time on Diecashcars.